Hey guys, it's Jordan with National Speed, and today we've got something really cool for you. Now, nearly every day we get the same question about our Stage 2 package for Hellcat models. What's better for pump gas only? A ported snout with a stock untouched supercharger, or a full port? And this question's more loaded than it might seem at first sniff. As we've covered in other videos, reducing inlet restriction on positive displacement superchargers almost always results in a considerable power increase. The theory is that by allowing the supercharger to draw air with less restriction, this translates to an increase in power due to improved efficiency. But as we'll cover in this video, that line does have a major caveat. In short, less restriction doesn't always translate to more airflow. And in these cases, it means you're spending money to lose power, which obviously defeats the purpose. Now, it's well accepted that full port on a Hellcat supercharger is reserved for max effort setups. The thought is that gains only show up at higher boost levels, so this doesn't really apply to pump gas. But is that really the case? And that's what we're answering today. Our subject for this video is Kevin's 2019 Dodge Challenger SRT Hellcat, which operates on 93 octane. Up first, we're starting with the following combination: Metco Motorsport's 2.85 upper supercharger pulley, COG Performance ported supercharger snout, COG Performance 108mm throttle body, and normally we use a JLT Performance air intake system, but in this case, Kevin wanted to reuse his existing Corsa intake system until he goes Stage 3. It won't perform nearly as well as our preferred JLT, but it'll work fine for comparison purposes. Now let's get our baseline dyno pulls in current conditions. Alright, our baselines come in at 726.80 wheel horsepower and 647.10 pound-feet of torque. Now, that's obviously significantly lower than we normally see with this package. In fact, that's 80 wheel horsepower less than this car did just a couple months ago with the exact same combination. So what changed? Well, Kevin installed drag radials, and as we've covered in another video, this has an enormous impact on your dyno readings. But even though the power is reporting lower, this is still perfectly useful for comparison purposes. Up next, Alex installs our test supercharger that's received a ported bearing plate from COG Performance. But before he does, let's have a look at the difference between stock and the ported bearing plate. Now, see how much more of the supercharger rotors you can see on the ported version? That equates to additional airflow. Now, with no other change in setup, let's see the results. Alright, a lot to unpack in the data here. And the first thing that jumps out? Considerable losses up until about 5,000 RPM, and then the gains ramp into a new peak output of 751.67 wheel horsepower and 650.87 pound-feet of torque. That's peak gains of 24.87 wheel horsepower and 3.77 pound-feet of torque over just the ported snout and throttle body. And not to mention, maximum losses of 41.65 wheel horsepower and 49.67 pound-feet of torque at 2600 RPM. And one thing to note is that no tuning revisions were made during this comparison. So we would be able to offset some of these losses down low with a little bit more ignition timing, but we wanted to show the difference in airflow alone. So what's going on here? Well, the answer is not just boost pressure, but how the delivery of that boost pressure has been altered. So let's compare boost pressure at key engine RPM. And as we step through this data, remember that Hellcats produce 11.6 psi in factory form. At 3000 RPM, the ported snout produced 14.21 psi, while the full port produced 12.43 psi, nearly 2 psi less for the full port. At 4500 RPM, the ported snout produced 14.79 psi, while the full port produced 13.92 psi, nearly 1 psi less for the full port. And at 6000 RPM, the ported snout produced 15.81 psi, while the full port produced 15.95 psi. Now, remember when we said that less restriction doesn't always translate to more airflow? Well, that's what's going on down low here. With a pump gas safe pulley ratio, the supercharger simply isn't moving enough air to take advantage of the full port until the engine starts winding up. And then the gains start ramping in. But with a stock redline and shift points, you're only recognizing those gains for a split second before you shift to the next gear. However, check out what happens when you increase engine speed to 6500 RPM. Oh yeah, that's starting to show up. Output jumps big time to 771.31 wheel horsepower for the full port and 740.59 wheel horsepower for the ported snout and throttle body alone. At this RPM, that's a significant difference of 36.72 wheel horsepower just by spinning the engine a bit faster and allowing that airflow of the full port to really shine. So what does this tell us? Well, for the broadest power delivery on pump gas, ported snout and throttle body alone is the clear winner. And for daily drivers, this is a good way to go. But what about those more interested in drag racing, half-mile events, or trips to Mexico? With a higher redline and shift points, these gains start to make a lot of sense. And frankly, knocking a little bit of power out down low can result in a more usable power band, unless you've got all the traction modifications. So, our conclusion for a pump gas Hellcat: if you want the broadest power band possible, stick with the ported snout and throttle body. And if you're looking for optimal straight line performance, the full port is definitely worth considering, but only if you increase your redline and your shift points to take advantage of the power. Now, if you want to see the same comparison with max boost and ethanol, let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay tuned for more. And as always, if you have any questions at all, we're happy to chat. Thanks for watching.